This day in sports history. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. How often do you think about your soap? Well, if you answered, not much, maybe you should. You see, a lot of what passes for soap in stores is technically not soap, according to the FDA's definition. It's full of lab-created chemicals and detergents because it's cheaper to make. Now, what if you could buy natural soap made from natural ingredients like tallow, palm oil, coconut oil, and scented with essential oils, and for just a little bit more than you'd pay for grocery store soap? Sterling Soap is 100% natural, and with a wide variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, and cologne, there's a product and a scent for just about everybody. Check them out for yourself at sterlingsoap.com. That's STIRLING soap.com. It's January 4th, and on this day in 1981, Red Right 88 went off the rails. Oh, Cleveland. Until the Cavaliers won the NBA title in 2016, the entire country could feel your pain through a 52-year championship drought. The Browns suffered through the drive, the fumble. The Cavaliers had to deal with Jordan and the shot. Willie Mays robbed the Indians in the 1954 World Series with the catch. Well, on this day, several years before the drive and the fumble, there was Red Right 88. I mean, this sounds too cool to be disastrous, doesn't it? And yet it was. So, this is a playoff game between the Browns and the Oakland Raiders. The Browns had nabbed the number one seed in the playoffs after an 11-5 record and winning a tiebreaker with the Houston Oilers. They'd received a first-round bye, and they only needed to win this divisional playoff game against the Raiders and then the AFC Championship game, and they were headed to New Orleans for Super Bowl 15. Now, of course, the Raiders were another 11-5 team, and in fact, there were 4 of those in the AFC that season. So, this was not going to be a game in which they just rolled over. Game time temp was 4 degrees, which made it the coldest NFL game since the Ice Bowl. Now, one thing to understand why Red Right 88 was even a consideration at the end of this game is that Cleveland's kicker, Don Cockcroft, was having a pretty rough day. Though never a gimme, he missed a 47-yard field goal in the first quarter that would have put the first points on the board. After a Jim Plunkett fumble, the Browns had another opportunity to score, but Cockcroft shanked a 30-yarder. Since the offense and special teams couldn't light up the scoreboard, the defense decided to do it. Calling the action for NBC that day was Don Criqui and John Brody.
Well, let's see what they go to now. It's 3rd down and 3 for Oakland. No score on the board. 6:23 left to play in the first half. Plunkett takes a look. In the flat, he's intercepted. This will go for a touchdown. The ball is picked off by Ron Bolton. And into the end zone he goes. His second interception of the day. And the defense comes up with the first score of this football game. Ron Bolton with his second interception in the flat. They were going to Bob Chandler. Bolton took it, had a clear track into the end zone.
That was a 42-yard pick six, but Cockcroft's troubles continued when his PAT was blocked. Oakland was able to put together a scoring drive capped by a Mark Van Egan touchdown, and they were able to kick the ball through the uprights for the extra point, and it was 7-6 at the half. Cockcroft worked out his issues, or maybe he just warmed up the leg a little bit in the locker room because he kicked 2 field goals in the third quarter to give the Browns a lead. But the Raiders answered that score with another one of their own, with Van Egan scoring his second 1-yard plunge of the day, another PAT, and it was 14-12 Oakland. Late in the fourth, the Browns came up huge on defense again with 2 stops of Van Egan on 3rd and 4th and short runs, preventing the first down and getting the ball back with time winding down. A Brian Sipe to Ozzie Newsome connection for 29 yards and a Sipe to Greg Pruitt 23-yard hookup put the Browns in field goal range. And of course, that's all they needed. But with Cockcroft's troubles in the first half, Browns coach Sam Ratigliano was wary of sending his kicker out to try to win it. So when he called timeout with 49 seconds left, he told Sipe to run Red Right 88, a pass play that would send receivers into the end zone. Retigliano told Sipe to throw the ball into Lake Erie if the receiver was not wide open. And as you have probably figured out by now, if you did not know the history of this one already, it did not end well for the Browns. Here's Cricky and Brody again.
49 seconds to go. Wrong. Into the end zone. Was it intercepted?
I think
Oakland intercepted the ball.
Michael Davis is the man that picked it off. That's just a great play at a very critical time. It even looked like Newsome might have come up with it. The Raiders didn't believe it for about 5 or 10 seconds.
Mike Davis was a notorious interception dropper in his career. He was the epitome of a DB as a DB because if they could catch, they'd be wide receivers. But in this particular instance against the hard luck Browns, he caught it. For Browns tight end Ozzie Newsome, that interception crushed him for years.
Other than at some funerals, I've never seen a place go so silent as when that ball was intercepted. I had never experienced anything like that. We could have won the Super Bowl that year. We felt we were that invincible. We felt that good about ourselves. It took another 6 years for me to finally get that out of my system.
Also, Cockcroft said many years later that he was far from 100% for this game. In an interview 30 years later, he said that he had 2 herniated discs in his back and needed 4 epidurals to just get through the season. He probably should have gone on IR, and the Browns should have gotten a different kicker. Well, the Browns were one and done in the playoffs, while the Raiders made the most of their good fortune by winning the AFC Championship game the following week and then winning Super Bowl 15 over the Eagles. On this day in 2006, it was the greatest finish and the granddaddy of them all. The Rose Bowl is the oldest bowl game, hence its nickname, and there have been some classic games throughout its 100-plus year history. But there really is not a whole lot of argument that this was not the all-time greatest edition of the Rose Bowl. I mean, you've got number 1 Southern Cal and number 2 Texas, a battle of the unbeatens for the National Championship game that came down to an incredible score in the final 30 seconds of it. So, yeah, this was absolutely everything you wanted in a bowl game and more. Now, before we get into the game, there was a lot that happened in the years after this game was played surrounding Reggie Bush and the vacating of wins and all that stuff. That's not my concern in retelling this story. The entire 2005 USC season has been wiped clean. Now in the era of NIL money, the Reggie Bush controversy seems silly. So when I say that USC came into this game with a 34-game winning streak, know that for NCAA folks, a lot of those wins no longer exist in official record books. But it's not like they didn't actually play those games and the Trojans actually won them. Okay, so let's get started. But where exactly should I start? You got USC, who had 2 Heisman Trophy winners with Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush. You got Texas with their second longest winning streak in FBS football behind USC with their 19 straight wins. Or how about that both of these teams had been ranked 1 and 2 since the preseason, with some calling the double Heisman backfield of USC the best college football team ever. The nation was indeed watching on this night. This game ended up with the highest rating of any BCS game, with 22% of televisions tuned into this game. USC led 24-23 at the end of the third quarter, thanks to Lendale White's 3rd touchdown run of the night. He'd also finished with 124 yards rushing in this one. The Trojans would extend their lead in the first few minutes of the fourth with this run by Bush. Calling the action that night in his final college football game in his long career was Keith Jackson.
He gets it, goes to the outside with it. Oh, it's around the corner! Touchdown!
Bush had 13 carries for 82 yards and 6 catches for 95 more. His 25-yard TD run put USC up by 8. A Texas field goal cut into that a bit, but when the left-handed Leinart hit Dwayne Jarrett inside the 5, it was another Trojan touchdown.
Leinart going for it. Jarrett. Touchdown.
Jarrett's second effort to get into the end zone was next level. He finished with 10 catches for 121 yards. Leinart put up some great numbers as well with his 29 completions for 365. He finished with a QB rating of 152.4. Well, after the PAT, USC had the largest lead of the game at 38-26 with 6:42 to play. So the Longhorns needed some points, and they were running out of time. And that's when it became the Vince Young show. First, he scored on this 17-yard scramble.
Young slips a little, coming back. There's daylight. Here he goes. Touchdown.
The Longhorns needed the ball back, though, and that's when they got a big stop from their defense on a 4th and short. That gave them the ball with a little over 2 minutes to play at their own 44. They worked their way down the field with some underneath routes. They got out of bounds, stopped the clock, but the drive seemed to stall out at the 9-yard line. Facing a 4th and 5, they needed 6 points, and they looked to number 10 to give it to them.
4th and 5, the National Championship on the line right here. He's going for the corner. He's got it. Vince Young scores.
They went for 2, calling a QB draw, and they got it, which put them up by 3 with 19 seconds left. The Trojans had a couple of plays but couldn't put anything together, and for the first time that year, USC lost and was supplanted as the number 1 team in the country by the Texas Longhorns. Now here's the talent that played in this game that night. In the following NFL draft, 4 players who played in this game went in the top 10. And in total, in several subsequent drafts, there were an amazing 49 players from these 2 rosters drafted to play in the NFL. On this day in 1976, George Blanda, the oldest man to ever play in the NFL, played his final game. Blanda is like the Paul Rudd of football. He just never seemed to age. He was drafted by the Chicago Bears back in 1949 out of Kentucky, where he played for Paul Bear Bryant. George Halas drafted him in the 12th round, and along with him playing quarterback, Halas put him at linebacker as well. Blanda admitted that playing for Halas was great, but the legendary coach was also well known for not paying his players very well. After 10 years in the league, Blanda retired from football due to a dispute over money with Halas and the Bears, and he was at home during the 1959 season. And if there had not been a new league starting up, then that would have been it for Blanda, and his name would have been mostly forgotten, and I certainly would not be talking about him today. But the American Football League started up in 1960 as a competitor to the National Football League, and the new Houston Oilers signed Blanda to a contract. Now, Blanda was the first star of the new league, playing quarterback and leading the Oilers to the first 2 AFL championships in 1960 and 61. He was the league MVP in 61 after throwing for 3,330 yards and 36 touchdowns. After playing with the Oilers for 7 seasons, it looked like Blanda's career was over for the second time when the Oilers released the then 40-year-old Blanda. But that's when Al Davis saw value in the veteran and signed him to play for the Oakland Raiders. Over the next 9 seasons, Blanda played a little quarterback and he kicked, though his biggest impact may have been as mentor to a young Kenny Stabler. Stabler was drafted in 1970 after also playing football for Bear Bryant, albeit 20 years later, and when Bear was at Alabama. But on this day in 1976, the 48-year-old Blanda kicked a 41-yard field goal and an extra point in his final game. He played 27 years in the NFL and the AFL in 4 separate decades, and he was elected to the Hall of Fame in 1981. A couple of quick hitters for you. Also on this day in 1984, Adrian Dantley hit 28 free throws in a game to tie a record set by Wilt Chamberlain. And in 2012, West Virginia beat Clemson 70-33 in the Orange Bowl. It was the most points scored by one team in a bowl game until 2018, when Army equaled that. And time now for another That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. It's National Whipped Cream Day.
What did you say?
And if there is one man who deserves a statue but he doesn't have one, it's Aaron Bunny Lapin, the man who created Reddi-wip. He was born on this day in 1914. He invented Reddi-wip in the 1930s, and we continue to enjoy it today. And here's the thing. I like pre-sliced bread as much as the next guy, but seriously, whatever the next big thing is, we should say, that's the greatest thing since Reddi-wip. So go celebrate Aaron Lapin and National Whipped Cream Day today and have some whipped cream from a can. Hey, this is Steve White, the host of This Day in Sports History. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the episode or you're a fan of the podcast, can I ask you to do me a favor? I made the shortlist for the Best Sports Talk Podcast in 2024. There are some well-known folks in this category, such as the Kelsey brothers, Scott Van Pelt, Bill Roden, and I can use all the help that I can get. I put a link in the show notes that will take you to the page, and if you have a moment, click that link and cast your vote for my podcast. I would certainly appreciate it. Thanks to all of those who have voted, and again, thanks for listening. Have a great day. I'll talk to you tomorrow. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.
Hey there, sports history fans. We've got some exciting news to share with you. 6 of our podcasts from the Sports History Network have made it to the final round of voting for the prestigious Sports Podcast Awards. Here are their shows and the categories. Historically Speaking Sports and This Day in Sports History are both competing for Best Sports Talk Podcast. No Nonsense Old School Weightlifting History is in the running for Best Fitness, Health, and Wellbeing Podcast. When Football Was Football is up for Best Sports Documentary Podcast. Wrestling with Heels On has entered the ring for Best Wrestling Podcast. And Shoulder Roll Virtual Boxing is fighting for the title for Best Combat Sports Podcast. Now, of course, we need your help to take home the championship for each of these awesome shows. All you gotta do is head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/vote. Cast your vote for your favorite shows, or better yet, all 6 of them. Again, every vote counts, and we gotta show the world how much sports history really matters. So thank you for your support and making Sports History Network the headquarters for sports yesteryear. But again, don't wait. You gotta go vote now. That's over at sportshistorynetwork.com/vote.